Have you ever felt the weight of an entire system pressing down on you? That suffocating feeling when the odds are stacked and the powerful dismiss you as nothing? Today, we're diving into the incredible true story of Elijah Vance, a black man with no law degree, no connections, just an unwavering promise to his grandmother. He walked into a courtroom where a judge laughed at him and a corporate lawyer treated him like a fool. But what happened next? Well, let's just say Elijah was about to expose a multi-million-dollar fraud right in front of their stunned faces, proving that justice doesn't always wear a suit. This is the unseen architect. The polished grandeur of the downtown courthouse in Fairhaven City, California, felt like a world away. It was a place of hushed reverence and cold, impersonal efficiency, far removed from the quiet, tree-lined streets of the historic black neighborhood where Elijah Vance had grown up. Here, the air was thick with the scent of old paper and ambition, and the opposing counsel's side of the room buzzed with the quiet confidence of well-tailored suits and expensive legal degrees. For Elijah, though, it felt like a cold, gleaming machine, grinding relentlessly towards injustice. Elijah Vance, a man in his late 30s, stood before it all. His posture was steady, defiant, despite the slightly worn suit and the knowledge that every eye in the room, especially the judges, was already judging him. He wasn't a lawyer. He never claimed to be. He was a skilled carpenter, a craftsman whose hands understood the value of solid foundations, of building things that last. But today, he was much more. The sole defender of his beloved grandmother's home, a cherished legacy in Willow Creek. That house wasn't just property, it was history, memories, and the very soul of his family, the bedrock for 3 generations. He carried the immense weight of his grandmother, Mama Ruby. She was the woman who had raised him, with fierce love and unwavering faith, who now, frail from age and a recent stroke, couldn't fight for herself. He remembered her tears, her confusion, when the foreclosure notice first arrived, a cold, bureaucratic threat to everything she held dear. This wasn't just about winning a case for Elijah. It was about honoring Mama Ruby, about protecting a piece of their heritage, their very identity, from a corporate machine that saw people as nothing more than numbers on a balance sheet. Judge Sterling Hayes, a man known for his efficiency and his almost allergic reaction to pro se litigants, those representing themselves without a lawyer, peered over his glasses. A hint of amusement, barely disguised as a smirk, played on his lips. "Mr. Vance, representing yourself?" The question dripped with thinly veiled condescension, an unspoken challenge. Elijah met his gaze, unflinching. "Yes, Your Honor." A ripple of chuckles came from the opposing table, where Veronica Thorne, a sharp, ambitious attorney known for her ruthless efficiency in foreclosure cases, adjusted her designer glasses with deliberate ease. Thorne was here to do what she did best: win, and quickly. "This should be quick," she muttered to her assistant, just loud enough for Elijah to hear. Elijah heard it all. He was supposed to hear it. That was the point. They wanted him to feel small, to feel outmatched, to feel the psychological weight of their dismissiveness. He'd been counted out before. He knew what it felt like to be dismissed, to be underestimated, but that was exactly why he was here. He knew, deep in his bones, that true strength isn't found in a title or a suit, but in the unwavering conviction of purpose, especially when you're fighting for something deeply personal, something you refuse to let go of. They thought they knew him. They thought they knew how this would end, but they had no idea the fire that burned beneath Elijah Vance's quiet exterior. The stage was set, and the battle for legacy was about to begin. Judge Hayes, exhaling sharply, rubbed his temple as he flipped through the thick case file. "This is a property dispute, a foreclosure challenge, correct?" Elijah nodded, his focus unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor, my grandmother's home." Hayes barely glanced up at him. A dismissive flick of the wrist. And you believe you can argue this case against a seasoned attorney like Ms. Thorne? Elijah didn't flinch. His voice, steady and calm, resonated with a quiet power. I don't believe, Your Honor. I know. A few muffled chuckles rippled from the corporate side of the room, but a new, unspoken tension settled over the courtroom, the kind of silence that comes when someone unexpected refuses to back down. Veronica Thorne rose with practiced ease, buttoning her jacket as she stepped toward the jury. Her voice was smooth, confident, perfectly tailored for the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, gesturing toward Elijah without even looking at him, as if he were an annoying, irrelevant fly. "This case is simple. We have a man who refuses to accept reality." Her words dripped with professional disdain. "The property in question was rightfully acquired by my client Sterling Financial through legal foreclosure. The law is clear. The facts are irrefutable. This is not about emotions. This is about contracts, deadlines, and obligations. My client followed the law. Mr. Vance's family did not." She paused, letting the cold, hard facts sink in, then offered a casual shrug. "I sympathize. Losing a home is painful. But pain does not override legal responsibility. The numbers don't lie." She nodded once toward the judge, then took her seat, hands folded, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, as if the case was already over. Elijah sat still, unmoved. He'd expected this. Every polished word, every dismissive gesture. This was the corporate narrative, clean, clinical, devoid of human context. But as he rose from his seat, he caught the way Judge Hayes leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a man watching something he didn't believe would be worth his time. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," Elijah cleared his throat, his voice steady, commanding attention. "Ms. Thorne is right about one thing. The law is clear. The question is, does her client actually follow it?" A flicker of irritation, quick and sharp, crossed Thorne's perfectly composed face. Elijah continued, his voice gaining a quiet power, a resonant depth that came from months of relentless solitary work. "I've spent the last 6 months, not in law school, but in libraries, online forums, and public records, studying every case, every statute, every loophole that banks and corporations use to strip homes away from families." He paused, letting the weight of his statement hang in the air. "And I found something." Judge Hayes, now intrigued, raised an eyebrow. "Something?" Elijah nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. And it changes everything." Thorne let out a quiet, dismissive laugh. "Oh, this should be good." This is where the real power of an unconventional mind comes into play. Corporate entities, and even the legal system itself, often rely on the assumption that regular people won't have the resources, the intellect, or simply the sheer time to challenge them effectively. They count on intimidation and the sheer complexity of the system to deter ordinary citizens. It's a common mistake, this overconfidence in one's own perceived superiority. You see it everywhere, from schoolyards to boardrooms. People dismissing others because they don't fit a certain mold, don't have a certain degree, or don't look the part. But Elijah Vance, with his street smarts and meticulous, almost obsessive research, was about to expose the fatal flaw in that assumption. He was armed not with a law degree, but with a fierce love for his grandmother, and a tenacity born from personal stakes. He was about to prove that knowledge, when driven by passion and a deep sense of injustice, can be far more potent than any formal training. The seeds of doubt had been planted, not just in the courtroom, but in the minds of anyone listening who had ever been told they weren't enough. Elijah ignored Thorne's dismissive chuckle. He turned directly to the judge, his gaze steady, unwavering. "Before I begin, Your Honor, I'd like to submit an official request for discovery, because I have reason to believe the plaintiff is hiding something." The courtroom shifted. Judge Hayes, his interest piqued, leaned forward, his expression now devoid of amusement. "Hiding what, Mr. Vance?" Elijah's gaze locked onto Thorne's, a silent challenge passing between them. "Fraud." Just like that, the room wasn't laughing anymore. The word fraud hung in the air, cold and sharp, like a sword suddenly unsheathed. Thorne's perfectly composed smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of disbelief, then alarm. For the very first time, Judge Hayes gave Elijah more than a passing glance. "Fraud?" The judge's voice carried a note of skepticism, but beneath it, a palpable current of undeniable curiosity. Elijah nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. I believe the foreclosure on my grandmother's home was based on forged documents, and I can prove it if I'm allowed to request full discovery." Thorne let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A baseless accusation meant to stall the inevitable. The property was seized under standard foreclosure proceedings." Her voice was sharp, but a tremor of fear was now detectable. "Standard?" Elijah tilted his head. He took a deliberate step forward, his voice steady, gaining a quiet power. "Tell me, Miss Thorne, how standard is it for a bank to foreclose on a house when the original mortgage documents have two different signatures from the same person?" A ripple of murmurs, hushed and incredulous, swept through the courtroom. Thorne's jaw clenched, her composure rapidly unraveling. "What are you talking about?" Elijah didn't answer her. Instead, he reached into his worn folder and pulled out two crisp copies of Mama Ruby's original mortgage agreement. He walked them calmly to the bailiff, who handed them to the judge. "These are two separate copies of the same document, Your Honor. One from the initial filing and one from a later modification. If you look at the signatures, you'll notice they don't match." Judge Hayes leaned in, scanning the papers, his forehead creased with concentration. Elijah continued, "Now, I'm no expert, but I know my grandmother's signature, and that second one, that's not hers." The judge's expression shifted dramatically, from dismissive to intensely focused. He looked up at Thorne, his voice gaining an edge. "Mr. Thorne, do you have an explanation for this?" Thorne cleared her throat, a nervous sound. "Your Honor, this is an attempt to confuse the issue. Signatures can change over time." "Maybe," Elijah countered, his voice cutting through her weak defense. "But that second signature is from a document filed only 3 months after the original, and if you compare them side by side," he pointed towards the papers in the judge's hand, "you'll see that not only do they look completely different, but the second one was signed the day after my grandmother was hospitalized for a stroke." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Even the jury members leaned forward, their expressions a mix of shock and dawning understanding. Judge Hayes turned back to Thorne, his tone firmer now, laced with a cold authority. "Miss Thorne, does your client have the original signed documents on file?" Thorne hesitated. It was quick, barely noticeable, but Elijah saw it, and so did the judge. We would need time to retrieve them, Your Honor." Elijah smiled, a slow, knowing smile that wasn't smug, but simply confident. "That's fine. I'll wait." The silence in the room was different now. It wasn't just intrigue. It was doubt. This was the seismic shift, the moment the seemingly invincible corporate facade began to crack. It's a powerful lesson in the unveiling of truth, how a simple, undeniable fact, presented by an unexpected source, can dismantle the most elaborate lies. The psychological impact on Thorne was palpable. Her carefully constructed confidence had shattered, and Judge Hayes, who had dismissed Elijah as an amateur, now looked at him with an undeniable flicker of awe. The initial battle was over, but the war, armed with irrefutable evidence, had just begun. Veronica Thorne, her face now a mask of barely contained frustration, tried to regain control. "Your Honor, these documents don't change the core of the case. The defendant is grasping at straws, hoping to delay the inevitable." The bank followed the legal process. That's what matters. Her voice was sharp, but the underlying panic was clear. Elijah let her words hang in the air, letting their hollowness settle. Followed the legal process? He let out a small breath, shaking his head. Ms. Thorne, do you even know who your client bought this debt from? Thorne blinked, genuinely caught off guard. What does that have to do with anything? Elijah turned to Judge Hayes, his gaze firm. Your Honor, the mortgage on my grandmother's home was sold 3 times before it landed with the current lender. 3 separate times. He paused, pulling out yet another document from his folder and walking it to the bailiff. But the transfer paperwork, that's where it gets interesting. Judge Hayes took the papers, scanning them, his jaw tensed. Elijah continued, his voice steady, unraveling the next layer of deception. Each time the loan changed hands, it should have been accompanied by an endorsement, an official transfer from one lender to the next. But look closely. Thorne shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes darting between Elijah and the judge. Judge Hayes's brows knitted together. There's no signature on the last transfer. Exactly, Elijah confirmed, a quiet triumph in his tone, which means the last company had no legal right to foreclose on my grandmother's home. And the bank that did, Sterling Financial, they never actually owned the loan in the first place. A hushed murmur rippled through the courtroom, louder this time. The tension in the air thickened, palpable. Your Honor, this is... Thorne's voice was tight, desperate. Judge Hayes cut her off, his voice now devoid of any trace of patience. Miss Thorne, this is a problem. Elijah took a slow breath. He had them, exactly where he wanted them. They had underestimated him, laughed at him. But now, they weren't laughing anymore. But exposing the fraud was one thing. Proving intent, proving this wasn't just a mistake, but a systemic issue, was another. And that was where Elijah was about to hit them the hardest. Your Honor, Elijah continued, his voice resonating with newfound authority, I'd like to call a witness. Judge Hayes looked at him, surprised. A witness? Elijah nodded. Yes, the person who notarized the second mortgage signature, the one I believe was forged. A quiet gasp from the gallery. This wasn't just about missing paperwork anymore. Elijah was about to bring someone into the courtroom who could unravel the entire illegal scheme. Thorne stood, immediately, furious. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. This witness was not disclosed beforehand. Elijah turned to her, his voice even, cutting through her protest. That's because I only just tracked her down yesterday. And what she told me... He let the silence stretch for a beat, letting the anticipation build to a fever pitch. Changes everything. Judge Hayes studied Elijah for a long moment, then turned to Thorne. I'm allowing it. Thorne stiffened, her face pale. She knew this wasn't going her way anymore. The door at the back of the courtroom creaked open, and a woman stepped in. Ms. Evelyn Reed, a notary public, looked utterly terrified as she made her way to the stand. She adjusted her glasses, her fingers gripping the railing like a lifeline. Judge Hayes nodded toward her. State your full name and occupation for the record. She cleared her throat, her voice trembling. Evelyn Reed. I'm a licensed notary public. Elijah stood, his voice calm but firm, a stark contrast to the woman's fear. Ms. Reed, do you recall notarizing the second mortgage modification for my grandmother Alma Vance? Evelyn hesitated, glancing nervously at Thorne, who glared back. I do. Elijah nodded. And were you present when she signed the document? Another pause. A flicker of profound discomfort crossed her face. Thorne shifted in her seat, sweating. Elijah waited, giving her space. Finally, Evelyn exhaled, the admission a ragged breath. No, I wasn't. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Hayes's gaze sharpened, cutting through the air. Elijah kept going. "Ms. Reed, did you witness anyone else signing on her behalf?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "No." Elijah stepped closer, the weight of his next question immense. "Then how did the document get notarized?" Evelyn's hands trembled slightly. Her voice, choked with shame and fear, delivered the final devastating blow. "I was given the paperwork by a bank representative. I was told it had already been signed, and I just needed to stamp it." Another shockwave tore through the room. She had just admitted that the signature was notarized without proper verification, making the entire foreclosure process fundamentally illegal. Thorne shot up from her seat, a desperate, last-ditch effort. "Objection! This is hearsay, Your Honor. She can't verify the legitimacy of—" Judge Hayes held up a hand, cutting her off, his tone cold, dangerous. "Overruled." He turned to Evelyn. "Reed, do you understand the legal implications of what you just said?" Evelyn nodded, her eyes glassy with tears. "Yes, sir. I didn't know at the time, but I should have." Thorne slowly sat down, running a hand down her face. She knew it was over. This was the brutal truth. The system designed to protect had been twisted and corrupted, preying on the most vulnerable. This wasn't just about a mistake. It was about a deeply ingrained, almost casual fraud that allowed powerful institutions to seize homes through illicit means. Evelyn Reed was a victim too, a pawn in a larger game, forced to confront the impossible choice between her job and her conscience. Her confession was a heartbreaking testament to how powerful systems can exploit even well-meaning individuals. The true plot twist wasn't just the forgery. It was the chilling realization that this wasn't an isolated incident, but a tactic used by many. Elijah had not just found a missing piece of paper. He had ripped open the curtain on a hidden, systemic injustice. The stage was set for the final triumphant verdict. Elijah turned back to the judge, his gaze resolute. "Your Honor, given this testimony, the forged signature, and the missing mortgage transfer endorsements, I move to have this foreclosure nullified. My grandmother's home was taken through fraudulent means, and now the evidence is right in front of you." A profound silence fell over the courtroom, heavy with anticipation. Judge Hayes exhaled slowly, the sound barely audible, then tapped his gavel on the bench. When he spoke, his voice was firm, carrying the full weight of the law. "The court rules in favor of the defendant. The foreclosure is void. The property is to be returned immediately." Elijah let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The tension that had coiled in his gut for months, the weight of the fight, the endless nights of research, it all dissolved in that single, resounding declaration. He turned, catching Veronica Thorne's hollow, utterly defeated stare. The woman who had dismissed him as nothing, who had oozed confidence, had just been taken down in front of an entire courtroom. But Elijah wasn't thinking about revenge. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice. His grandmother's home, Mama Ruby's legacy, would not be stolen. Not today. Not ever. He stepped outside the courthouse, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the steps. He paused, taking a slow, deep breath. The air felt different now. Not lighter, not freer, just real. The kind of real that settles in when a long, hard fight is finally over. Mama Ruby's home was safe. That was all that mattered. A few people from the gallery filtered out behind him, their voices hushed, still buzzing with the shock of what they'd witnessed. He caught snippets. Never saw it coming. That man should be a lawyer. But Elijah didn't need validation. He never had. What he needed was justice. And today, he got it. "Vance!" a voice called out from behind him. Elijah turned to see Judge Hayes standing at the top of the courthouse steps, hands in his pockets. The arrogance from earlier was gone, replaced with something more measured, almost contemplative. "You surprised me in there." The judge's voice wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Elijah met his gaze, a quiet challenge in his eyes. "You weren't the only one." Hayes studied him for a moment before giving a small nod. "You ever think about law school?" Elijah let out a quiet chuckle, the absurdity of it mixed with a hint of genuine pride. "Not really." Hayes smirked slightly, just for a second. "Might want to reconsider. You've got a talent for making people squirm." And with that, he turned and disappeared back into the courthouse, leaving Elijah standing there in the fading light. Law school? Maybe. Maybe not. But one thing was certain: if anyone ever tried to take what was his again, they'd better be ready for a fight. Because power doesn't just belong to the ones with money and titles. It belongs to the ones who refuse to back down, the ones who relentlessly pursue truth, and the ones who defend what truly matters. This case wasn't just about winning. It was about defining legacy. It was about a carpenter, a craftsman, building a solid foundation not just for a house, but for justice itself. Elijah Vance had not just saved his grandmother's home. He had exposed a systemic flaw, inspired a cynical judge, and proved that the underestimated always have the most to prove. And when given the chance, they don't just win, they change everything. As the last golden rays of sunset faded over Fairhaven City, Elijah Vance knew his fight wasn't just for Mama Ruby's home. It was for every family told they didn't matter. Every person dismissed by a system that prioritizes profit over people. This story, Elijah's story, is a powerful reminder for all of us, especially for every black man and woman, every person who has ever been underestimated or judged by appearance. It's a testament to the unshakable spirit found in a simple act of courage, to the relentless pursuit of truth, and to the profound power of one determined soul to dismantle the mightiest of lies. Because when you stand firm in your truth, and when you dare to fight for what's right, well, sometimes the quietest voices cause the loudest earthquakes. If Elijah's incredible journey resonated with you, if it ignited a spark of defiance, or if it simply filled your heart with hope, then hit that like button right now. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss more powerful stories of resilience and justice. And most importantly, share this video. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion can break down any barrier, and that a single act of courage can inspire a movement. In a world that often tries to silence us, let's keep choosing truth, keep amplifying these unseen victories, and keep proving that real power belongs to those who refuse to back down.